retrospectives.com.
Hello everyone, so after the first video about the Game Boy and the Game Boy Pocket, here is the link in case you didn't watch it. As you may have noticed, I didn't include any games recommendations in that video. That's what I'm going to do today. This is a list that comes from a mix of personal preferences and memories. So games that I played back in the day and games that I discovered later on. There are more than 500 games for the original Game Boy, so this is really just a drop in the ocean, and this is not even the majority of the games I own. I just, like I said, want to give you some recommendation. And we start with the Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle, which is the first of a series, and this is a game I had back in the day. It's an action puzzle platformer. The goal is to collect all items in a maze-like level while avoiding enemies. There is no jump ability, so you must navigate basically amongst platforms, ladders and pipes strategically. Contains 80 stages. I don't think I finished the game, at least back then, but I went very far. There are also other familiar characters from the Looney Tunes series, like Daffy Duck, Sylvester and others. Fun fact, in Japan the game is known as Mickey Mouse because basically Capcom held the Disney license in US at the time, so Kemco, the publisher, basically reskinned the characters to the Looney Tunes for the Western release. DuckTales. I was a huge fan of the cartoons in the 90s, and this game is very good, as all the Capcom games with the Disney license in the 80s and 90s. This one was released in 1990 and in Europe in 1991. It's a classic 2D action platformer. You control Scrooge McDuck on a globe-trotting quest to find 5 lost treasures and become the richest duck in the world, obviously. And the game has 5 main stages, like Amazon Jungle or Transylvania or even the Moon. And it's great to notice that the Game Boy versions basically maintains almost everything from the NES original with only simpler graphics. Fun fact, DuckTales was amongst the best-selling Game Boy's titles, and it even introduced multiple endings based on Scrooge's final wealth at the end. It was quite rare in 1990, especially on a portable game. Hokuto no Ken, or Fist of the North Star, from 1989 and 1990. Here I take the opportunity to show you also the differences between Western Game Boy games packaging and Japanese Game Boy games. The Japanese packaging is much smaller, has a different format for the manuals as well. It was one of the first times where we actually received a Hokuto no Ken game with the original characters and names and story. You remember the examples I showed you for the Sega Master System with the Hokuto no Ken game for the Sega Mark III becoming Black Belt on the Sega Master System international release. In this case, we got one of the first versus fighting games for the Game Boy, even preceding Street Fighter II for the Game Boy by 5 years. It's not a great game, the collision detection isn't great, still they managed to implement a 2-player fighting game on a hardware with only 2 buttons and no colors, but for the fun of the series, it's a game you must own. I told you in some other videos that in Italy Hokuto no Ken was a great deal, known as Kenshiro, Ken il Guerriero, and another big deal was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as well. I was a big fan of the cartoon, and I had this particular game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, back from the sewers, released in 1991 and in Europe in 1992, always late to the party, but I had these. For some reasons I went directly with the second follow-up There are 3 games in total for the Game Boy about the Ninja Turtles, and I think retrospectively also I picked the best one, probably also for some nostalgia reasons, but I think this is the best one. It's an action platformer beaten up hybrid. It's a side-scrolling combat and obstacle filled stage kind of game. You can obviously select which turtle to play with before each stage, and each turtle has different strengths, as we know, and different weapons. Both the gameplay and the graphics are great. This is a really fun game. Obviously it's a little bit repetitive at some point, but it's highly recommended. Was also part of the Kawabanga collection from 2022. Overall, Back from the Sewers stands as one of the better handheld beaten-ups of the era, bringing basically arcade-like turtle action on the Game Boy on the go. Now, maybe you don't know, maybe you noticed a few clues here and there, but one of my favorite games ever is Street Fighter 2. So, by the time Street Fighter 2 came out for the Game Boy in 1995, I had already moved on to the Game Gear, then the Atari Lynx. So by the time Street Fighter 2 was released in 1995 for the Game Boy, it wasn't a novelty anymore for home consoles. Street Fighter 2 was an ambitious portable adaptation. Despite the obvious hardware limitations, it delivers a head-to-head fighting on the go, and it's a loose interpretation of the arcade classic. The gameplay is based on Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition and Super Street Fighter 2. For instance, it includes the ability to play as the boss characters and even some moves from Turbo, but it omits several characters and features. Only 9 characters are playable out of the usual more than 12. For example, Dalsim and Honda and Vega were removed entirely. The Game Boy struggles with the speed and frame rate, but the character sprites are quite impressively large and detailed for the platform. All fighters retain their signature special moves, minus a few complex ones, and the matches follow the traditional best of 3 rounds. It even supports multiplayer via the link cable, and if played on a Super Game Boy, more on that later, 2 players can even fight on the same screen using 2 controllers. The fact that they could successfully port Street Fighter 2 on a monochrome display, even this achievement is quite impressive. Adventure Island. I had this back in the day, loved very much and played it a lot. The title is confusing. It's one of those games that have multiple titles depending on the region. The first Game Boy Adventure Island is the adaptation of NES Adventure Island 2, while Adventure Island 2, Aliens in Paradise, is a port of NES Adventure Island 3. So, clarifying that, let's not talk about Wonder Boy and all the confusion about these 2 series, but this is a very nice side-scrolling platformer. You control Master Higgins through 8 islands to rescue the kidnapped girlfriend Tina. You ride dinosaurs, you ride different kinds of dinos, and add a lot of rich variety in the mechanics of the gameplay. This is a game that I recommend. It's a classic today. Whether you play it on the NES or the Game Boy, I prefer the Game Boy's version, also probably for some nostalgia reasons. But yeah, discover or rediscover this title. It's actually very enjoyable. Alien vs Predator, the last of his clan. 1993. It's a side-scrolling action platformer with some beaten-up elements set in the Alien vs Predator universe, as per the title. It's a good example of a Metroidvania kind of platform adventure, so that's why I include it here. It's not an amazing game, it's quite repetitive, but it's a very unique interpretation of this sci-fi franchise. That's why I thought to include it. not only for the beautiful artwork, but it's still enjoyable. Usually you play as a predator, specifically the last surviving predator, hunting aliens across 7 stages. You have different weapons and you battle through xenomorph, eggs, face huggers, chest busters, all the iconography basically of the series. Levels span from jungles to aliens' hives, with some exploration elements as well. The Japanese version is simply titled Alien vs Predator, and it's one of the first video games to bring the Alien and Predator franchises together on a handheld. If you like Metroid and Castlevania, and you like aliens or predators or both, well, this is a game for you basically. Prince of Persia, this game doesn't need any introduction. I used to play it on DOS computers back in the day. An amazing game, I loved it a lot. I included it here because I didn't play this version at the time, but I think it's a good version of the game. Controllers could be better, you need to get used to it. It's slightly different from the keyboard, for example, but it's from 1992, published by Virgin Games in this case. It's a cinematic platformer, action adventure we could say. It's very known for its fluid, realistic character animations. Achieved via rotoscoping, I recommend the backstage videos and the story that the developer, the original designer of the game, Jordan McNair, released a few years ago. They are very interesting. He's also the author of Karateka, and you can see quite a few similarities with the Prince of Persia's animations as well. It's great to see the back scene, how they created those animations. Fun fact, to comply with the Nintendo's of America's content guidelines, the scene in the opening cutscene showing the hero being beaten in the dungeon was cut from the Western release, while it's still intact in the Japanese version. Donkey Kong, or Donkey Kong 94, it's from, surprise, 1994. It's a puzzle platformer with action elements, and while it begins as a remake of the original 1981 Donkey Kong arcade, it quickly becomes a much larger game with 100 levels of puzzle-centric platform challenges. After the 4 arcade levels of the classic Donkey Kong arcade, then it surprises the player by continuing with 9 new worlds, city, forest, ship, jungle and so on, for a total of 101 stages. This title introduced the moves like the handstand, the backflip and trampoline high jump of Mario, and these acrobatic abilities foreshadowed Mario's 3D moves in Mario 64 basically. This game is essentially the predecessor of Mario's vs Donkey Kong series, that is one of the best Game Boy's titles, especially the one from Game Boy Advance and later on Nintendo DS, and even Switch to this day. When you play it on the Super Nintendo's Super Game Boy, it features a special arcade cabinet style screen with borders and custom color palettes as well. The Hunt for the Red October surfaced in North America and the rest of the world in 1991, developed by Beam Software. It's a side-scrolling submarine shooter, very particular, an adaptation of the Tom Clancy novels and movie, an underwater action with a mix of shooting and stealth elements, very atypical for a platform. Basically, you command the Soviet submarine Red October through the side-scrolling levels at deep sea combat. The submarine is equipped with regular torpedoes, A button, and special weapons like B buttons, firing a more powerful missile. Stage 5 includes an Easter egg. There are the ruins of Atlantis appearing as a background scenery. The title squeezed a feature quite rare on the Game Boy, digitalized cinematic cut screen and a 2-player link mode, head-to-head submarine battles. Another hit by censorship, On Nintendo's platforms the word nuclear is never mentioned, and the manuals refers to special warheads instead. I remember buying this game with my grandparents' money as a present. We were in Florence, I remember, and I quite enjoyed it. I found it very original, and I played it quite a bit. It can be quite repetitive at times, as usual with, Game Boy games can be quite repetitive overall, but I enjoyed it a lot. Yes, this is a super famous game, Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins from 1992. I loved this game and still do to this day, but it's probably the game I played the most on the Game Boy back in the day. It really opened the way for me to follow Mario on following games such as Super Mario World later on the Super Nintendo for me. Super Mario Land 1 is a nice game, a bit odd as a Mario game, but still very nice. But for me, Super Mario Land 2 is a masterpiece. And also, it shows how, when optimized, a game on the Game Boy can be very deep, having great graphics, great gameplay, longevity, music. This game has it all. So, short and simple, this is a must. To conclude, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Super Game Boy for the Super Nintendo, released in 1994. At the time, I probably had the Super Nintendo or the Mega Drive. I did a bit of back and forth between the two, but I never used the Super Game Boy at the time, especially because by 1994 I had already moved on from the Game Boy to the other competitors, the Game Gear and the Atari Lynx. I rediscovered it later on, and I occasionally still use it today. It's much more than just an adapter. It was a full Game Boy on a chip, basically, inside of a chunky Super Nintendo cartridge. You slot it into the console, insert any Game Boy game, and boom, your tiny 2.6-inch experience exploded into a full-blown TV, adding even colors. Many later games of the Game Boys were enhanced for the Super Game Boy on the Super Nintendo with custom color palette, decorative screen borders, better audio through the Super Nintendo hardware, and even two-player support with the Super Nintendo controllers in specific titles such as Street Fighter II, as we saw. So here I have a PAL Super Game Boy, boxed of course. It came with the manual, but also this big catalog magazine that showed a lot of Game Boy games and how they looked, and a particular focus on the colors palette. It was a big deal to put colors on Game Boy games, and thanks to the 4-shade architecture of the Game Boy games, basically it was technically possible to apply colors even after a game was released in monochrome. It's quite mind-blowing if you think about it at the time. And then I have this Super Game Boy 2 Japanese version released in 1998, and this revision added something that fans had asked for, so a physical link cable port. So this meant that you could now play two-player link cable games between an actual Game Boy and someone playing on the TV. The design was also transparent and fun, semi-clear shell, bright color, and it came bundled with a new border menu system and extra palettes as well. It also adjusts the speed of the Game Boy's games, because the first Super Game Boy had a slightly slower speed when playing Game Boy games. This is the Super Game Boy controller by Hori. It was a Japan exclusive accessory designed specifically to enhance the experience of playing the Game Boy games on the Super Nintendo. Today is quite a collector item, which is unfortunate because it's also a very good controller, so if you find it out there, I recommend it. And here it is. This is the video, the second part video for the Game Boy. If you haven't watched the first part, again, here's the link, and I will probably make more videos on the Game Boy. For instance, the Game Boy camera and printer is another topic that I love. But I wanted to give a proper retrospective to this amazing handheld. I omitted a lot of games, I know. For instance, one that I really like, the Nintendo World Cup. I briefly showed you the gameplay in the first video, so maybe I will also have a second or third part with more games. Thank you for watching, consider subscribing, see you next time.